So, I hardly know how to start with an introduction for Ben, because his qualifications and accomplishments are many. Actually, Ben, you need to be about 75 years old to have done all the things that are in here.
I feel it, let me tell you.
So Ben graduated from Harvard with a degree in history of science and earned his teaching credentials there. And very early in his career, he used Gates Foundation grant money to open the High School for Public Service, Heroes of Tomorrow, in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. I don't know how Crown Heights, Brooklyn compares to Lansing, so that will be one of the things I would like to hear you talk about. The school was founded as one of 8 New Vision schools opened in Brooklyn that year in an effort to replace failing high schools with smaller, more successful ones. And today, it boasts extraordinary passing rates on the Regents exam and a unique on-campus urban farm program. In looking this up, I discovered an article on the Christian Science Monitor about the school, and it was full of words like caring and supportive and high expectations and respect for one another. So I don't know, again, how Crown Heights compares to Lansing. I think the scale might be hugely different, but I'd like to hear what Ben thinks about that. For his work in education, Ben was awarded the prestigious Jefferson Award for Public Service for an individual under 35 years of age. He was a Dean's Fellow and Distinguished Lecturer of Education and Leadership at Hunter College, City University, New York, where he directed all the school and district leadership programs for that institution. In 2015, he was appointed to the New York City Board of Education, the largest school system in the US. In 2016 and 17, Ben was elected president of Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, the largest educational professional organization in the country. Over the past decade or so, Ben has consulted around the world, supporting schools and districts to better serve students and their communities. And domestically, he's helped support urban assembly schools, as well as other New York City Department of Ed schools and districts. And now, Ben is superintendent of Lansing School District as of 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
2 years, 3 months.
So we welcome him to Lansing and to our program today. Now, just to complete the introductions, Betty Menchik is the chair of the Education Committee of League of Women Voters Lansing area, and she'll be moderating this discussion. I'm not sure how much of a presentation, whether it's like a conversation. Betty's going to be your guy.
Awesome.
And
my Virgil
audience are mostly League of Women Voters members, many of whom have a background in education. So maybe you can guilt them into helping.
I will absolutely try.
And, League of Women Voters supports education as one of the pillars of democracy in this country and one of the ways we can achieve more equity as a nation. As an organization, we're nonpartisan, but that does not mean that we don't support policies that strengthen our educational system at the local, the state, and the national level. There are cards and pencils on the table, on the chairs, and if you have questions, please put them on that, and someone, Susan, Heidi, will be picking up the questions. And as I say, Betty will moderate.
Awesome.
There's also a feedback sheet. Please, if you have things you want to tell me, would you write them on there? I'd rather know that way than hear them through the grapevine later.
Right.
So how would you like to start?
I mean, I'll just say hello. How about that? Jerry, who knows me, is, I appreciate that. Well, first of all, good evening, everybody. This is a mic to record. Do I need to use the mic, or you guys can all hear me? Use my principal voice. I was a high school principal for 10 years. You had to clear a cafeteria very quickly. You could do it. Well, the first thing is I just want to say thank you and to apologize. The reason why I was a little late today is that we had a board meeting. We don't normally have a board meeting on the 4th Thursday of the month, but because of some scheduling conflicts, we had to create one. So I didn't want to cancel this. I hope you invite me back again. You clearly do not have to read my bio next time. All of that is words. What I can tell you is I've had an extraordinarily wonderful career and time being in education. When I was an undergrad, I got my teaching license. I did my student teaching. I then taught in England for a year. I then taught in Brooklyn for 3 years. And then I became a high school principal for 10, and then was a professor for about 8, running a leadership department, and then coming here to Lansing. this is being recorded. Is this going to be published anywhere? Because that'll just mean if I don't curse. I'm getting a nod. So what I will also say is I think it's funny to me actually how often people say, "Why are you here, Ben? How did you end up here?" And so I always kind of joke that there's two reasons. There's the on-the-record answer and the off-the-record answer. The on-the-record answer is Lansing's an incredible place. It's really special. It's a capital city. It's got about 10,000 kids in the school district, about 24 schools. It is an extraordinary place that can punch above its weight. You've got MSU down the street. You've got the state government. You've got all sorts of wonderful things. You have real media. You have 3 TV stations. You have a newspaper, a printed newspaper. You have a community that really cares very, very deeply about its education. But sadly, it's been incredibly underperforming for generations. And we're going to talk about that. But what was so appealing when I was a professor was I kind of wanted to be a superintendent. I had been a professor training superintendents for like 8 years, but I had never been one, right? Going to Norway, helping directors there, going to India, but I'd never been a superintendent. And though I have a big ego, I knew that I wasn't going to want to go to a big district. I wanted something like 10,000, which made a lot of sense. But what would so impress me about Lansing was that Lansing had so many amazingly different programs. You have a Mandarin immersion program, a Spanish immersion program. We actually have horses. I don't know if you know this. We have the equine therapy program. Who knew, right? We have 9 horses at Beacon. It's awesome. We have a lot of really, really great stuff. But again, historically, sadly, we haven't been serving our kids. And my experience while I was a K-12 educator was that kids will do great if you hold them accountable and you support them, right? When I was a principal, we took over a building that had a 23% high school graduation rate. It's the lowest in the city, and that's saying something in New York. And within 4 years, we had a 98% high school graduation rate. And that's not because I'm doing anything special. It's because when you actually believe kids can do it, you actually hold them accountable, you have great staff, you're in this together, kind of amazing things can happen. And so I saw that in Lansing. I also want to give big credit to my school board. School board meetings are on TV, so I watched them, and it was clear to me that our school board actually cared about the children too. There are some school boards, Flint, that you can actually see a school board member beat up another school board member in a meeting. It's no joke, right? That's not a place that anybody can work, right? That's really difficult. And so I saw a lot of really wonderful things that Lansing had, and I was kind of given this incredible opportunity. But the off-the-record answer is my girlfriend's from Detroit. So, we had been dating a long time, and, was she going to move to New York? Was I going to come to Michigan? And she won, and she runs a large nonprofit in Detroit. A lot harder for her to bring the nonprofit to Brooklyn than for me to bring my talents to Lansing. And so I just started to look at places in Michigan, and Lansing really was something special. You'd be amazed the rumors I hear of like why I'm here. It's pretty funny, that I was gonna like run for governor or something, or I had like a brother in the city or some crazy stuff. Rumors are incredible, but just to tell you again, Lansing was really interesting to me with a lot of latent potential. And then also I was looking at Michigan because of my wonderful girlfriend. So that's the deal. I am super happy to answer really any questions, but I would like to maybe take 5 minutes to go over what we've done since I've become superintendent, because I think it will be really helpful to create a narrative around what we're doing and then to kind of ask any questions that you have. So when I got to Lansing, and again, I don't want this to be about me, it's the staff, it's the community, people have been doing amazing things, but sadly, when I got to Lansing, it was very clear that there had been some issues, right? I can be really specific, but I'm not going to. And what was really apparent and appalling to me was that some of our most at-risk kids were the ones that were the most underserved. So one of the big statistics to think about is when I got here, less than 50% of our special ed kids were in compliance. So there are 3 big compliance numbers: annual IEP revals, triennials, or what are called reevals, and initial evals. So when you're an IEP student or a special ed student, you need to get your initial evaluation on time because you need to get your services. Then you need to get your annual review to make sure everything's okay. And then you need to get your triennial or your true review after 3 years. All three of those numbers were less than 50%. That's so bad that the state probably should have taken us over. And in fact, I asked the state to take us over. They did not want to. I asked them to come to the office, and it was really fascinating because what we ended up saying was, what's going on? And what we found, of course, was that there was just a lack of focus and a lack of leadership on special education. And that was one of the really big, important pieces. And so within a year, we actually went from less than 50% compliance to 100% compliance. That had really never been done in Lansing. It was so shocking, actually, that when we got to the ISD, which is the kind of local area that supports special ed, they said we couldn't believe it, and they actually gave us a standing ovation. But again, what that speaks to is the systems and structures that we don't have or we didn't have, and that's kind of emblematic of one of the big things that we did. The other stuff, of course, is that this district has been losing students for really 30 years. The number of enrollment has gone down precipitously, and this year we'll give you a brief kind of inside baseball.
It's like they're fixing the chair so you don't have to do
the middle of November, we are going to report for the first time in, I think, 28 years, an increase in enrollment. Yeah, it's a big deal. But why that occurred is because of some major changes that the district was doing. Again, we've created systems and structures in the district that were not necessarily great for kids. You might have noticed that years ago, way before I got here, they added 7th and 8th graders to the high schools, right? As far as I could tell, not a single parent wanted that. But yet they did it, and they did it for what I thought were maybe questionable reasons, right? Is that there was a fear that they were losing so many students that they didn't want to close down a specific high school, Sexton. And so in order to save Sexton, they wanted to now add 7th and 8th grades to kids. Well, is that good for kids? Is that not good for kids? The parents seem to think that it really wasn't. And so because of that, we decided to take 7th and 8th graders out of the high schools, and that's been really good. Another big thing to look at is when we're talking about enrollment, the district was always losing students between 3rd grade and 4th grade. Now you might say, well, why is that, right? So when you look at the data, the district left about 100 students going from 3rd to 4th. Well, what was happening was that our K-3 schools were stopping in 3rd grade. It turns out that a lot of our families actually like the elementary schools, right? There's a large narrative in Lansing that our schools are bad. A lot of that is kind of racism, and it's classism, and it's a bunch of other stuff. But what you realize, of course, is that families who go to our schools, they kind of tend to like it. And so by increasing a lot of the pre-K 3s to pre-K 4s, we actually now this year have 50 more 4th graders than we did 3rd graders. And that is, again, indicative of listening to families, trying to figure that out. There's a couple of other big ticket things that I talk about. One is transportation. I'm sure you've read throughout whatever the district and the country that we have a huge bus driver problem, right? So just to give you an example of what happened to me the second week I was on the job is it's July 2021. And the school district hadn't been in session for a year and a half, hadn't been in person, and I have the first transportation meeting. And I say, okay, great, let's meet transportation. So how's it going? And they say, well, it's okay. And I say, well, great, I've been told that we're supposed to have 72 routes, 72 buses. And they're like, yeah, we have 36. So, Wait a second. What do you mean you have 36? And mind you, the way that buses worked in Lansing is that they're triple tiered, meaning that they have 3 routes in the morning and 3 routes in the afternoon. So 72 routes really is, you know, a lot more. It's 200 plus routes in the morning, 200 plus routes in the afternoon. I said, what do you mean you're only going to give us half? And they said, well, sorry, we're only going to give you half. And so you say to yourself, well, you can do a couple of things. Their suggestion was just not have buses for high school kids. I was like, well, that's not going to happen, right? And then they said, well, why don't you just, you know, have 4 different starting times and start schools at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. That's insane. So what do you have to do? You got to get creative. So we created gas cards. So now any family in Lansing can ask for a gas card, $50 per kid per month, and we now have over 2,000 families on gas cards. Look, I'd rather give them a yellow bus, of course I would, but those are the kinds of systems and structures that we walked into at the beginning, and that's really, you know, that's really problematic. And so again, there's a lot of really good people in Lansing and a lot of really bad structures and systems. And so, you know, I just want to highlight that stuff for you because you can see stuff from the outside of, okay, you know, what's going on, but there's these insider baseball things that incredibly enough impact how you run a school so much more than you would think, right? Half your buses can't run. What are you going to do, right? And so, you know, one of the big changes that we did, which, you know, some people weren't thrilled about, was putting high school kids on CADA. Okay, like, I understand that, but we've now been doing it for a long time, and I'll never forget, they had all these news agencies at the CADA hub interviewing kids, and they're like, you know, aren't you afraid? You know, you're a 11th grader and you're being made to take the CADA bus. And one of the kids looked at the press agent and said, I've been taking the bus since I was 12. What do you think this is? And I was like, that's my kid, right? But the idea is, when you're given these situations, you've got to be creative. And sometimes it's going to upset folks, but you end up kind of doing right. And what was nice about the relationship with CADA is that every one of our high school kids gets an unlimited pass, which means not only can they go to and from school, but on the weekends they can go to the Meridian Mall, they can go to the MSU, and we even offered actually passes for parents, because some of the fear was, oh, my 9th grader doesn't feel comfortable. Okay, well, you can go with them as well. Look, I wish we had yellow buses for everybody, I really do. But, you know, those are the kinds of things that we inherited that caused some real concerns kind of moving forward. You know, look, it's been 2 years, 3 months, and 20 days or whatever it's been, right? So July 1st, 2021. And what I can say, and again, this is thanks and credit to the staff and to the families and to the kids, is again, when I got here, the graduation rate was 62%. That's a 4-year cohort. Even the language of using cohorts was something that the district didn't use before. Again, when they were thinking about graduation rate, they were just thinking how many seniors were graduating. But that's not how you do graduation. You have to look at the initial 9th grade numbers. So our graduation rate was 62%, 62.1%. And last year it was 68%, so it went up by 6 points. And last year, but this year's numbers, because you have to figure it out and get it all, you know, audited by the state, we are absolutely going to be breaking 70%, which is the first time in recorded, I mean, I wouldn't say history, but since the state started to do it, we're going to break 70, and if things break right, we'll break 75. That's incredible, right? Well, thank you. But again, that happens because we changed systems and structures. One of the things we were able to do was we created graduation specialists. Graduation specialists at each of the high schools work with kids to make sure they graduate. But something else happens, and this is one of the interesting things about education, is a lot of times the reason why your graduation rate is low is because you didn't actually follow up with where the kid went. So for instance, little Ben Shuldiner went to Sexton and moved to Florida. Okay, well, if I move to Florida, I should be going to school somewhere. You got to follow up on that. You got to figure out where they go. Once you say they went to, you know, whatever, Miami High School, I'm sure there's something like that, then that child is taken off the rosters. And what was happening is we weren't necessarily cleaning the rosters the right way. We were holding on to a lot of students that had moved, that had done all these things. But what it showed was we weren't caring about each of the individual children How do you follow up on each child and figure out what's going on? The other things that we've done, because we now have graduation specialists and we know which students are, let's say, down a credit or 2 credits, is we've done some really fascinating things. Some of you might know that we have Ebersol, which is a 200-acre kind of outdoor education thing. Well, starting last year, we started to run weekend credit recovery programs. So 30 or 40 kids would go up to Ebersol for the weekend and only do math. Just math and drink hot cocoa, right? And that was what they did. And because it was credit recovery, they were making up classes that they had already taken before or that they had tried to take. And so what we saw was a lot of our high school kids had been kind of forgotten about, had been failing multiple classes, and what were the high schools doing? Well, just take it again, take it again. And that wasn't gonna work. So doing those kinds of things, but being strategic about it, having a graduation specialist, having the school counselors in each school, following each kid. One of the things that we did last year, which was super powerful, was once a month, the principal and their counselors, I would go to the school and just put up a list of who was supposed to graduate and say, tell me everybody's story. And at first, they didn't have answers, right? Because they weren't thinking that way. Not that it was wrong, but that's not how they thought. By week 2, by month 2, by month 3, now they had stories about, well, this is Johnny, and this is Janie, and this is whoever. And then by the end of the year, you get graduation rates that you're supposed to be, raising up to 75, because now the high schools are thinking that way. Because one of the things that was so crazy was that when you didn't think about cohort rate, but you only thought about your graduation being your seniors, those kids that started with you who then were off your roster, you forgot about because you weren't seeing them. But if you were being asked about each individual kid, you end up really focusing on them and doing that. So that's been a big one. The other one that, even though it's a much smaller number, is actually a little bit more impressive, is that we've been able to raise the daily attendance rate by 5.96%. I won't say 6%, but almost 6%. And to actually increase daily attendance by that much has been really, really amazing. And that's still with the bad buses. But how do we do that? It's the same thing. You have people at the schools and in central office really focused on attendance. And why attendance, why graduation, and why enrollment? Because that was actually what was chosen by the staff when I got here. What I didn't tell you is that when I was hired on July 1st. But the former superintendent, Sam, who I have breakfast with every month, he was really gracious, and he allowed me to kind of come to the district even beforehand. And I asked if I could have a meeting with everybody, and I said, give me the 25, union leaders and principals and senior leadership, put them in a room, and I said, hi, everybody. So what are our goals? And their response was, what are you talking about? And I said, that's probably not what I wanted to hear, but that's cool. How about we make some goals? And I'll never forget it. You probably remember Ray Fries. I don't know if you remember Ray. So I'll never forget it. He was the principal of Mount Hope. And I said, hey, what should our goals be then? And Ray says, well, how about graduation? I said, sounds like a great idea. So I said, okay, well, if graduation rate is our focus, what's the number? And then somebody said, well, what is our actual graduation rate? I was like, I don't want to tell you, but it's in like the low 60s. And somebody said, how about 75%? I said, that's probably not good enough. And somebody said 95%. I was like, I'm not that good, right? And so they said, how about 85? And you could tell that the crowd was like, okay. And then I said, well, what about time, right? Because you can't just say it's an 85% graduation rate. By when? And Ray said, hey, 85 by 25. And everybody started to applaud, right? And the idea is it was self-created by the people in the room that we were gonna have a high school graduation rate of 85% by 2025. Then we got to an attendance rate, a daily attendance rate by 90% by 2025, and then an enrollment rate of 11,500 by 2025. I will be the first one to admit, I do not think we're gonna get to the enrollment. I do think we will get to the graduation and the attendance. Enrollment's a little tricky, mainly because with open enrollment, it's really hard to kind of fight against that. We are increasing, right? I think, again, this year we're increasing enrollment for the first time really in 28 years or 27 years, something like that, unless you count the weird COVID year where 1,000 kids dropped and then 500 came back. But what's nice about those goals, again, you would hear from from the community that said this is graduation is kind of a number for the total, right? You spent 13 years in the district. Did we do right by you? Did you graduate? Second is attendance. That's like a daily barometer. And then enrollment is kind of you vote by your feet, right? And not that you don't know this, but Michigan is unique, and I use that word I think correctly, meaning there's no other like it, is in almost every other state, if you lived in Lansing and you wanted to, let's say, go to Okemos, you would have to pay, right? So if you're in New York and you live in Mount Vernon and you want to go to Scarsdale, you would have to pay $25,000, which is the child rate. But in Michigan, you don't have to do that. So you have a lot of families that choose to go to other districts, and God bless them, right? Like that's, you know, I'm not going to fault somebody because they think that the choice is better somewhere else. But I will say that I think at times that decision is made with a racist lens or a classist lens and things like that. But I will say I was just at a meeting in East Lansing High, and their building was pretty nice, and you know, and I appreciate that. So, you know, I don't know if we're going to get to the 11.5, but I will say we're certainly going to get to 10.5, and I'm hoping to get to 11.5 by 25. But also, if you've noticed, the number of student enrollment just in general in the state is going down because we're losing population as a state, and certainly folks aren't having as many kids as they used to. Although I will say, and I know you're a nonpartisan, so I can say this politically, but nobody else can, I guess, is without Mr. Trump as president, it means that more people get to come to this country. And Lansing actually has about 1% of all refugees in the country. And so that door is more open now, and we're seeing more folks coming in. We had about 300 families from Afghanistan come in last year. We've had more families from the Congo and from Cuba, actually, which is relatively new, but there's a kind of a mass exodus there. So, I mean, look, I'm happy to answer kind of any questions you want, but I do want to put it in that structure. It's been 2.5 years, 2 years, 3 months. When we got here, graduation rate very low, attendance rate low, enrollment low. We're moving. Should we do better? 100%. Can we do better? I hope so. But I think that what we're starting to see is in some respects a belief that things can happen. And look, I know that this district has made a lot of mistakes before I got here, and I certainly know that this district continues to make mistakes while I'm superintendent. But when you look at it from a 30,000-foot view, it does seem like things are in fact getting better. And you know, that's what data is about, right? Is to Michigan's credit, all you got to do is just go to myschoolsdata.org, I think it is, and you can kind of look at it. But you know, I think that what's interesting as a community group, you know, League of Women Voters, you care about the city deeply, clearly. I mean, you're hanging out with me on a Thursday night. I don't put that on anybody. You want to be here to support. I think what I want to point out is one of the struggles that Lansing has is that unlike pretty much every other city in the state, there's no large-scale philanthropy. And it's been one of the more frustrating things for me when I look at what happens in Flint or what happens in Kalamazoo. Just to put this in perspective, the Flint Public Schools has 2,500 kids in it. That's it, 2,500 kids, that's it. Yet Mott is giving them $200 million. I can't, I mean, you know, Kelly Dean, I know buses, but I love Kelly, he's super supportive. When Kelly's the largest donor in a city, that's going to say something, right? And I think that what we have to really think about is if Lansing's ever really going to become this pinnacle of education, we've got to think about what philanthropy looks like, and it doesn't have to be about money. It can be about time, and it can be about commitment, it can be about people. But if you just think about Michigan, think about each city and each family or each foundation. Battle Creek. Thank you. Grand Rapids. DeVos. No, that's okay. So you're allowed to say it, right? You know, Detroit, 900 people, right? You know, you've got Gilbert and you've got Gore and you've got people like that. You know, the Stryker, Kalamazoo, right? You know, you've got all these, every city Mott, of course, with Flint. You've got every city that has these big, big philanthropy arms that doesn't look at Lansing. And I've reached out, right? I called the GM folks, I called the Ford folks, I call those folks, and they just say, we don't do Lansing. And so if that's the case, that's the case. But I think what I would urge everybody in this audience to think about is, if we don't have the money to do it, do we have the human resources to do it? Do we have the people to do it? And I'll say one of the more frustrating things, again, about coming here is, you know, as a New Yorker, I'm used to community organizations and school districts just inherently working together. Like, that's just the deal. When I was a high school principal, we had 3 offices on the ground floor. Each was run by a nonprofit, and the deal we made with them was, we can't pay you, but we'll give you space for free if you serve the kids. And real estate in New York was a big deal. So they're like, oh, that's amazing. And you had all these great partnerships. And when I got to Lansing, it was a little sad and a little scary that I saw a huge disconnect. My second year, I asked all the pastors in Lansing to come to my office, and 40 pastors came to my office. It was awesome. And I just said, well, hey, everybody, like, nice to meet you. And most of them said we had never been invited to the Lansing School District before. And I was shocked, right? It didn't make any sense to me. And, you know, I just heard story after story. And so out of that meeting, we now have partnerships with, I think it's 7 churches that do tutoring and mentoring for our children. We have a wonderful partnership with other organizations that just had never really been asked to come in on a foundational way, right? It was, oh, one day come here and give out cookies, but that's not what it's going to take. What it's going to take is, are you going to be in the schools every day? Are you going to work with us every day? And we're happy to pay you too. I mean, you know, one of the organizations that I can think of, they were like, well, we'll come and we'll do tutoring, we'll do this. I was like, okay, how much do you guys want for that? Oh, no. I was like, no. You need to take something, because we need to make sure that everybody's holding themselves accountable for. So again, you know, in the 2.5 years, what have I seen? I've seen that the people in Lansing really want their schools to work. At the same time, there's incredibly low expectations here. There's a phrase that's used often, the soft bigotry of low expectations, right? When I go into a school and I hear a teacher say, well, you know, these kids, you know, we should just be nice to them, because that's nonsense, right? And actually what's really sad, I mean, when I hear school leaders say that, but what's really sad is that, sorry, it's my boss. Oh, great. Is that there's this other narrative that, oh, the kids in Lansing come in so low level that, you know, that's why we're low performing. That's actually not true. There is a really important Stanford study. It's a 10-year longitudinal study, 2008 to 2018, so pre-COVID. And it shows that every year a kid is in a Lansing school in that 10 years, they regressed. There's a negative growth rate in Lansing. So that means that kids came in, not high level, but came in at a certain level, and then each year they were regressing. We have to own that. If we don't own that, we're not going to move forward. And when I hear an educator or a parent or whoever just say, well, you know, we can't push them so hard, or, you know, and you know, I don't want to make their life worse, and my response is, well, if they don't know how to read, that's probably going to be worse for them, right? And so that's where the struggle is now, because, and I don't want to fault the teachers on it, they've been told for generations that they're amazing. And so if you've been told for generations that you're amazing, how do you then look and see, wait a second, this is telling me that we have 2% proficiency rates, 4% proficiency rates? What are we doing here, right? And so my senior staff, you know, used the analogy of Plato's cave, right? Is you see the world in 2 dimensions, and now you finally are seeing the world in 3 dimensions. The problem is that if you remember Plato's cave, they go blind, and then they hate everybody, and they try to kill each other, right? And that's, in some respects, what happens too, right? And so I think my ask of all of you is, we're moving in the right direction. You look at the data, not data that I create, but data that's created by the state. Attendance is up. Enrollment is going to be up for this year. We'll make it public in about 3 weeks. Graduation rate is up. Test scores are up, although pretty small. All of the data, all the indications are going in the right way. But for us to jump to that next level is we're going to need more outside help. And that outside help could be fiscal, but I don't think that's going to happen in Lansing. But I think then it has to be human resources. And because of that, you know, I urge all of you to figure out ways to volunteer, to donate your time, to donate your space, to donate your love, because the only way this is going to work is with the community. You know, but, you know, again, I think there are green shoots. Are we still making mistakes? Absolutely. Are we making up for past mistakes? Absolutely. Jessica Benavides, the deputy superintendent, came into my office today. She's like, Ben, and she's like so tired. And I was like, Jess, what's the matter? And she's just like, every time we have a meeting, we're uncovering something else. And that's just the case, right? And that's okay. But we just have to be aware that we're going to continue to learn, continue to ideate, continue to try to work out. I will say, because I see Jerry, so I've got to say this plug, the relationship with the teachers union has been really tremendous. We signed a new teachers contract, which I'm really proud of. One of the reasons why I'm really proud of is that it makes our starting salary in Lansing the highest starting salary in the Mid-Michigan area. So we can, you should thank Chuck and Charles Richardson. But you know, it's really important that we pay our folks well. When we did the LASA contract, which is the kind of principals union, administration union, we broke 6 figures for the first time as the standard salary, the base salary for any principal, so elementary school principal. So, you know, I think that we're moving in the right direction. There's definitely things we have to clean up. I just had a meeting today. Somebody was wanting to talk to me about something that happened in 2014 that they're still worried about, and they're right to ask me about that. And of course, we're going to go look at the documents and see what's going on. But I get this feeling that we feel like things are going well. But you know, I'm certainly happy to hear of the mistakes that we're making and the stuff that we can do better. So I don't know. I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions you want, do whatever you want.
Everyone has cards, and Heidi and Susan will pick up cards, and then I'll read things. Having just actually looked at those growth figures compared to the percentage proficient, and I'm a big believer in growth. Tell me, what specific kinds of things are you focusing on, and what kind of teacher professional development are you doing so that the district, because it's minimal. And I wondered, as I was trying, I'm a numbers person, looking at the number of immigrant kids who are coming in, how much you think the result of growth is particular populations.
So if you don't mind, I will say that question again so everybody hears, because I want to, again, be super transparent. Our growth numbers versus proficiency are very low, very low. But what's interesting to your question about immigrant students, what we actually find is many of our schools that have large ENL, English as a new language, students tend to actually show some more growth. And the reason for that is they're coming at a certain level, and we actually do throw services at them, ENL services, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think it's about the newcomers at all. I think what it is, again, is just a 30-year history of not thinking about growth or thinking about proficiency. So what are we doing? Which is a great question, right? The first question about what are we doing? When I got here, I mean, I won't use names because I don't want to denigrate anybody, but we had a head of curriculum and instruction, right? And I said, hey, nice to meet you. What's your job, right? Head of curriculum and instruction. And the person's response was, well, I got to make sure that textbooks are everywhere. I said, well, wait a second. That's physical stuff. We could just have facilities do that. What do you do for instruction? And the person kept saying over and over, no, I just need to make sure people have the curriculum. I said, well, that's not going to work, right? So what we have now is an actual department of instruction. So we have a K-8 instructional lead for literacy, a K-8 instructional lead for math, and then a high school literacy, a high school instructional person. We also reorganized the district so that all of the elementary school principals have one person that they report to, all the middle schools and academies have one person to report to, and all the high schools have one person to report to. And then what we've done, and this is the really big thing that's changing, is we're actually going into schools, right? I remember my first year at Lansing.
Who is the we?
Oh, I'll explain. Yeah, sure. So when I got to Lansing, we had a bunch of teachers in the room and we were talking about trying to make some changes, and they're like, you suits from downtown, you don't know anything. And I said, oh, that's a good point. Like, what do you mean? And she's like, oh, we never see you. I was like, well, I go to school every day, no matter what, rain or shine. And I said, but I think you're right. The central office hasn't really been in the schools. And so the we is that we now have a director of elementary, director of high schools, director of middle schools, a director of instruction literacy, director of instruction math, director of instruction for high schools, and then we have a bunch of coaches. And last year, that team did 1,100 school visits. Unheard of, right? And so you have to be in the classrooms in order to start to see what's going on. And so what the big push this year really is two things. State standards, grade aligned, use the curriculum. One of the cool things, and I'd never really seen this before, I've worked in a lot of school districts, is the curriculum is actually chosen by what's called the instructional council. And the instructional council is teachers with the union kind of on one side and the administration on the other, and they collectively have to decide which textbook they're going to use or which structure. But what I will tell you is when I walk into classrooms, sometimes they're not using that. They're using word finds, or they're using something that they found online, and it's not grade aligned. I mean, one of the more difficult times I had was walking into a 7th grade class at one of the high schools, and it was clear they were doing 3rd grade work. I walked into a classroom where they were doing handwriting. Not in 8th grade, you're not. And so what we've got to make sure of is focus on the curriculum and then focus on grade standards. So that's what we're doing. It's going to take time. It's absolutely going to take time. But the big push this year is we did 1,100 school visits last year, but that was really supportive. The 1,100 school visits we're hoping to do this year is now about, hey, are you using the curriculum? Oh, nobody gave you a curriculum? Let's get them for you. Oh, you need some professional development? Let's figure this out, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to acknowledge that our growth rates are negative. I mean, literally they are negative, which means every year a child is in the Lansing School District.
Probably would be good to define a growth rate.
Yeah, so in essence, if you're in 1st grade, you're expected to make 1 year of progress to 2nd grade, 1 to 2, makes sense. What's happening in Lansing is that, again, through the stats that you're seeing, is that there's negative growth, meaning they're not making the year. Sometimes they're not making any growth, and then, of course, that would be negative. And what you see historically is from kindergarten through 8th grade, it's just a linear going down. And that's just not okay, right? And we got to fix that. So I'm happy to show you the data. It's all very public. The good news is the test scores did go up a little bit this year, but they're still really way, way below where they need to be, but yeah.
So research suggests that students of color who have at least one teacher of color may do better on tests and be less likely to have disciplinary issues. Research also suggests that white students show improved problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity when they have diverse teachers. How does the district recruit and retain teachers and principals of color?
If only you were with me the hour before I got here.
Yeah, well.
So just so you know, the entire presentation from 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock was answering that question. So again, not only do students need to see themselves in the curriculum, students need to see themselves in their educators, in their leaders, in their principals, et cetera. And so when I got here, the percentage of black teachers, I think it was 7%. It's now 12%, which is a 5% growth. But if you think about it as percentage growth, it's actually 45%, right? So that's one thing. The growth of Latino, Latinx teachers is, I think, something like 60%. So, you know, look, we have a huge road to go. The teaching staff in Lansing is around 70% white, 80%. I think it was 82 when I got here. It's now 77 now-ish. But again, look at the presentation that we did today. I don't want to get the numbers too inaccurate. And the number of BIPOC teachers has gone up in the last 2.5 years, but we have so much more to do. And so what have we done? Well, the big thing is we created the retention and recruitment department, which did not exist. And so right now we have Andrew and LaToya. Their main job is to retain and recruit. Some good numbers, though, looking kind of longitudinally, is that when you look at resignation numbers, they're actually lower for BIPOC teachers and higher for white teachers. And what we're seeing kind of from the large district is that because the district's teaching staff was so white, as folks retire, you're starting to see a kind of a reduction. So we're really trying to do that. The good news on the administrative side is that 50% of assistant principals in the district currently are BIPOC, and 47.63, I think I might be off by a little bit, of principals are BIPOC. And so, you know, you've got a movement on the leadership side for Black and Hispanic. We actually have an Asian principal for the first time, I've been told, in about 20 years. So there's a lot of movement there. What do we need to do? We need to recruit more. We need to do more. We need to reach out. One of the things that the retention and recruitment specialists are doing is that they're going to HBCUs. They're all very happy because they're going to the south in the winter, so they don't have to deal with snow. They're also going to historically Latinx institutions as well. They're trying their best, but I mean, I want to be perfectly candid here. It's not a good shape, right? We were in the high 70s, low 80s white teacher population, and so that means, you know, you're talking about a 20% BIPOC teaching corps. That could mean that a teacher could go 3-4 years without seeing a teacher of color, and that's got to stop, right? And so the good news is, again, please take a look at the data that we just shared, is that there is a good trajectory, but it's still so minimal. I mean, when you start off with 7.5% and you get to 12%, sure, that's a 40% or whatever increase, but it's still so minimal. And we're trying. I see some good things. Again, in leadership, it's different. It's actually 50% of the APs are Black, which is actually an overrepresentation. I mean, it's great. One of the things that we're actually struggling with in terms of leaders of color is that we have no assistant principals that are Latinx. We have a couple of principals that are, but that's something, and that's actually the largest increasing student population. So again, see the data, but the percentage of Black students in the district is going down, and the number of white students percentage-wise is going down, but the number of Latinx students is going up. We really don't have a ton of Latinx teachers or leaders. So it's something we're working on, but again, I'm happy to send you the data. You know, we're moving in the right direction writ large. And also the nice thing is that, again, michiganschools.org or whatever their data, they have administrator numbers and they have teacher numbers. Just so you know, administrators are school leaders or district leaders that have teaching credentials. That doesn't include somebody like a budget director or something like that. And I mean, I would like a more diverse budget staff, but to your question, the more important thing is the folks that the kids see, the folks that the kids interact. The other good news that I'll say is the senior leadership team, so the people that are the leaders of instruction, it's actually also 50% BIPOC. It's, I think, evenly 25% Latinx, 25% Black, and 50% white. Again, that's including the deputy superintendents, the senior directors of instruction, people like that. So we have a long way to go. We got to do more, but we're moving. So.
You came from, you started a charter school.
No, I did not. I want to be very clear. I've only worked in district public schools. My school was a district public school, not a charter school.
All right, well, moving on to the next question. Okay, how would you define equity? And we know that our schools mirror the communities they serve and vice versa. versa? How would you use this lens to make decisions that impact students and the community, specifically to combat the increase in violence in the city and within the schools?
Yeah, well, I would say a couple of things. One, I am very, very lucky to have the school board that I have. It's led by Rachel Willis, who I think is really quite tremendous, and the vice president is Robin Moore. And they've been a huge proponent of creating an equity committee. And what's been really nice about the equity committee is that they have come up with some very specific changes the district can do. So as we continue to roll out those suggestions, we're starting to do it. So a really good example is, a preponderance of discipline action against kids of color, right? So if you have 30% black kids in your district, but you're suspending 60% of the black kids, clearly you're being racist. I mean, let's just be honest, right? And so what does that mean? And so what you find is that when you look at how kids are suspended, the language is where you start to find some real problems. So I'll give you an example. If a kid gets suspended for punching, for kicking, for throwing something, that's very, very specific, right? That is language that is relatively objective. Being insubordinate is not. And preponderant, there was a thing you could check for multiple or problematic, I can't remember the language, but what you have is two sets of disciplinary actions. One is very specific, very objective, and one is very subjective. And surprise, surprise, who was the subjective language being used against? Kids of color. So what we've been trying to do is remove that even from being able to be used so that you can start to focus, and you're starting to see some changes. Now, this is relatively new. The equity committee started a couple of years ago, but they're finally going through a bunch of stuff now that we can then change policies. Another great example of equity is we were fining kids for library stuff, right? You didn't return your library card or your library book. Okay, fine. But what was happening is we were using it to stop kids from graduating from high school. Give me a break, right? Why would we be doing that? But you want to talk about equity, the fact that you're basically having a poor tax on children is ridiculous. So one of the first things that the board did, I remember the board chair looked at me and was like, can I do this? I was like, yeah, you're make the vote, right? Because it wasn't on the agenda, is that we just got rid of it. And that one act of getting rid of the library fine, stopping kids from graduating, changed a lot. So look, this district has a long way to go. So does America, and so does the school districts themselves. But when you look at your policies that you've been ingratiated with that are systemically racist, you've got to address those. And so things like discipline, things like, barriers to entry. Here's a great one. When I got to Lansing, everybody talked about CTE. Oh, it's the best, it's the best. And I said, okay, great. So I walked in and I was like, how come we only have 60 kids in our CTE program? Stats are very clear. Kids in CTE programs graduate more often than kids are not in CTE. Sorry, career and technical education, my bad. It's education-ese, I know, it's a language unto itself. And we only had 60 kids in the career and technical education program. And what happened was that we had created all of these barriers to entry because they didn't want basically kids in the program. So I said, this is ridiculous, let's stop this. And guess what? We went from 60 to 200 kids in the CTE program, and what also happened? All of those 200 kids, they still graduated at a higher rate, they went to school at a higher rate, they attended, all that stuff. And so equity is about how do you make sure that you are creating a district that is caring deeply about children in the most basic of ways, but also recognizing the outputs that you are creating. And this is a little bit wordy here, but I want to be very clear here. Education tends to focus on the inputs. What do I mean by that? Well, I taught them the class. I gave them the lesson. I don't care, did they learn? They don't focus on the outputs. And so what happens when we see graduation rates of kids of color lower than white students, well, but we treated them all the same. Well, A, that's probably not true, and B, it almost doesn't matter, because the point is that you have disparate outcomes. Now you have to address that. And so, we now have the highest rate of African-American kids graduating than we've had in years, I think actually ever, but that's a different story, is that you have to look at outputs and be very transparent about who is being impacted. That's what equity is, right? You know, we could talk about the, you know, those pictures where, you know, the little kids are looking over the fence and, you know, one kid is on a bigger a bigger stool and another one's a smaller stool and the medium stool and they all can see and that's equity. Sure, that's a nice picture. But the real issue is equity of outcomes. Are you graduating kids at the same rate? Are you teaching kids at the same rate? Are you suspending them at the same rate? And if you're not, you have to take ownership of that. If you just say, well, it's history, it's this, it's that. Nuh-uh. School districts absolutely can do it. I mean, again, when I was a high school principal, it was a 23% high school graduation rate. Everybody's like, oh, the school can't, these kids, blah, blah. 98% graduation rate in 4 years, because you believe that kids can do it, you hold them accountable to it, and then once you start thinking that way, a lot changes. A good lexiconical way of thinking about it is, if you ask a kid, are they going to college? You're, in some respects, saying that they might not be going to college. Now, we can argue, is college the right thing, and with the cost of college, blah, blah, blah. But if you say to a kid, what college are you going to, as a 9th grader, they start to think, oh, maybe I'm going to go to college. That's what we have to do in Equity Way, is that we have to say to all of our students, we expect great things from you, and then hold ourselves accountable to that outcome, not the input. So there's a lot there. I can talk about equity forever, but we have to be honest that we're not equitable in this district. The data is very clear that it's not. We're moving in the right direction, but we have a long way to go.
So in terms of meeting that goal, you need teacher professional development. Mm-hmm. Certainly as I think about learning chat AI, you know, as a slightly white-haired grandmother, you know, now having Chromebooks everywhere, what kind of strategy and what are we doing for teachers so they'll meet the challenges of producing the growth rate you want to see?
Yeah, you know, it's a good question. You know, again, on the base level, we're providing a ton of professional development. One of the great things that I'm very happy with is in the new teacher contract, we paid for it, but we bargained an extra meeting a month. And you might say, Ben, an extra meeting a month, who cares? Well, the issue was that the teachers were only meeting together once a month, and it was usually some pro forma, let me read a memo to you. But what we negotiated was an extra meeting every month for teachers to collaborate, to work together, to actually do some data dives, things like that. So we have to create the structure so that they can actually have that professional development. We also are spending tons of money. There's the new teacher project. We have a large grant called REAP, which is a $25 million kind of teacher leadership program that we've been doing a lot of teacher coaching and instructional coaching, things like that. It's not nearly where it should be, but we definitely need to, we're doing it. Yeah.
And how are you evaluating the results of it?
Well, I mean, good question. The feds have their own way of evaluating, so we have to do a lot of survey data. But what, again, it's outputs for me. Are we raising test scores? Are we raising attendance? Are we raising that? So far, not so much, right? But it just started. But again, that's where we are now diving deep into those growth rates. We're sharing those growth rates. We're looking at those. So remember I said that every month I meet with the principal of the high schools and their team to go over graduation rates? Well, starting in January, we're going to start to do those meetings with every school, going and looking at MSTEP scores, which are the state test scores, or NWA, which is a test that we take that's very aligned with MSTEP. So
yeah, why don't you define what NWEA is and how you're using it?
Sure. So basically, you've got a state test that's at the end of the year, like everybody has. That's their MSTEP scores. But there are diagnostic exams that you can take repeatedly throughout the year. So the main one that we use, that most school districts in the country use, is something called NWEA. That what's nice about that exam is that it's very correlated to MSTEP. So the kids take it 3 times a year, and then you could start to see growth, and you're supposed to see growth, right? But what we hadn't done is that we didn't even have good systems to share that data with our staff. right? And so, you know, there's just a lot of things. I mean, our attendance rates if you ever come to my office, you'll see a calendar, kind of a dry erase calendar of every day in the year, and handwritten are attendance rates of every day for elementary, high school, and then combined. Why is it handwritten? Because our data is so clunky that somebody has to come from upstairs every week and put that stuff on the board, because we're still trying to figure out the best systems to get that data. So anyway, it's a long and involved story, but we have to invest in professional development. We're doing some of it now. We need to do more of it. You did mention ChatGPT, which I find wonderful, is please, please do not be afraid of AI. It can be one of the greatest teaching tools you can imagine. Here's a great example. The hardest thing I have ever found in teaching is differentiation, right? So what that differentiation, I apologize, I don't mean to be pedantic, but every time you tell me to explain something, I'm trying to explain something. When you walk into a classroom of 25 kids, shockingly, not all kids are at the same level. They're not interested in the same stuff, and they certainly don't all act the same. With ChatGPT or AI, what you can do is you can take a paragraph, 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs, and you can say, hey, ChatGPT, please take this and put it on a 5th grade reading level. Please take this and put it on a 10th grade reading level. Please take this and put it on a 12th grade reading level. That's super hard for a teacher to do all by themselves. But with ChatGPT, you can do that. So now you can start to differentiate. So you could say, on the opposite, give me a paragraph about sports, because maybe a kid's interested in sports, or give me a paragraph about horses, give me at 3rd grade level, at 5th grade level. So I don't want anybody to be fearful of it. I think the school districts that don't engage in thoughtful use of technology are going to be held back. My favorite line about ChatGPT is that AI is not going to replace you. The person who knows how to use AI is going to replace you, right? And so we've got to really make sure.
We're going to hire all of our elementary
I
school
hope so.
students.
I mean, I hope we're teaching them that. So.
So I think you addressed some of this, but there are several people who would like to know about why we don't go back to the K-5, 6, 8, 9, 12 model,
Sure.
And more of the neighborhood schools. Our questionnaire says they are a retired school district teacher, parent of LSD grad, citizen taxpayer in the district, never saying no to a bond issue, which is really, I mean, this is an incredible district for passing bonds. So what's happening? Give us an update on the rebuilding of the schools from the last bond issue. I'm watching Mount Hope.
Torn
apart now.
I'm sorry, anybody who lives in a neighborhood, I'm sorry about the trees. I know I've gotten some word about the trees, but it had to happen. So what I'm hearing is about the restructuring of the district.
Yeah.
So, great, awesome. So let's start from the first thing, and I think I addressed this a little bit earlier. Having 7th and 8th graders in the high school seemed to be nobody's favorite. So if you got to pull them out, you got to pull them out, right? So you got to now think critically, where are you going to put them? Okay, great. So the first thing you had to do was not take in a 7th grade. So what we did two years ago was reduce the 7th grade in the high schools by about 50%. Then we took out the 7th grade completely and reduced the 8th grade this year to about 50%, so that next year we will in fact have only 9th through 12th graders in the high school. But you had to put them somewhere, right? And so we all also, and I want to be very frank here, this district has had K-8s for a long time. Gardner is a K-8, right? And so, Post Oak is a K-8. And then we also had K-6s. So Pattongill is a K-6. Luton was a K-6. But we had to figure out a way to get those 7th graders and 8th graders out of the high schools, and we needed to certainly put them somewhere. Now, so let's agree. I mean, you can disagree with me, that's fine. But taking the 7th and 8th graders out of the high school is a good idea, right? So we're going to do that. So we did, and it's going to be done next year. And I also want to be very clear, that does not mean I'm shutting down Sexton. Everybody said if I did that, I had to shut down Sexton. I do not. Having a school of 800 kids is totally okay. That's actually really good. And their football team still wins, so we're going to be good in the playoffs tomorrow. And so then let's look at the K3s and the K4s. As I explained also earlier, a lot of our families really like our elementary schools. They really do. They don't want to leave. But what was happening was from grade 3 to grade 4, we were losing 100 kids a year. What does that say to me? That says to me, our parents like our elementary schools, but they don't like our junior high schools. Okay, fine. And where did we not see that drop off? In our K8s. When you looked at Pattongill, when you looked at Post Oak, when you looked at Luton, when you looked at Gardner, when you looked at our other K8s, what you were seeing was families were staying. Oh. So if you look at the facts and you look at the families and you talk to them, the idea of a K8 actually became really strong. Here's the other big thing. We tend to, in Lansing, have families that have kids in multiple grades. Well, if you have 3 kids, one in 1st grade, one in 3rd grade, one in 5th grade, why would you want to take them to 3 different schools? The idea that they could all go to the same school, especially in the bus driver crisis that we're having these K8s can be really good. There's another thing that makes K8s much better than these smaller pre-K3s, pre-K4s, is you can have full-time specials teachers. So rather than have itinerant art teachers or itinerant music teachers, so somebody who does 2 hours in one school, then travels, and then you got to mark out, I mean, union rightfully so, and say, hey, they can't, you know, there's travel time and whatever, and so then it's 2 hours, then it's an hour off for travel, and it's 2 hours here, and then it's off. Now, if you can actually have a full-time music teacher in a building, they can teach, right? So there's a lot of really important reasons why going to K8s makes sense. Now, does somebody want to say, look, junior high schools were great. That's the way that they should be. Sure. I've never seen a great junior high school. I mean, junior high school is tough as it is. I'm not saying that they can't be great, and I'm sure they can be, but what I've seen in this community is our families like our elementary schools, and they stay because that's where they want to be. So increasing them with a 5th grade or a 4th grade, we saw it. The parents vote with their feet. That's what we're seeing. But there's a whole other piece, because you said neighborhood schools. So one of the things that, and I mean, it's recorded, whatever, the board knows I'm not the biggest fan. There was a big push, I don't know, 15 years ago, Jerry could probably tell me, for something called, was the Pathways program. So if you know, in this district or in the area, you could do schools of choice, right? So you could go to Okemos, you can go to wherever, East Lansing, you can go to Holt, all these places I'd never heard of before I got here. And you say, I'm gonna go to Holt. Okay, great. So there was a decision by this district that says, you know what we need to do? We need to do schools of choice, but internally. So they just killed neighborhood schools. And you know what happened? More kids left. More kids left. And so we need to figure out how to bring in neighborhood schools. And what we are slowly doing, because I don't want to freak out families, is that if you are newly enrolled in the district, and just see how absurd this was, if you were a newly enrolled family, you just walk in, the admissions department used to say, where would you like to go to school? And a lot of times families go, what are you talking about? Don't I just go to the neighborhood school? No, 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 no. Not with Pathways. You get to choose. And so what we were hearing were stories after stories after stories of families being like, we don't know. Now, some did. They knew where they wanted to go. But what ended up happening is we had kids that lived in the south going to Sheridan Road, which is like our most northern school. And there was a lot of discussion internally about neighborhood schools are good things. Why were we killing them? So what we are starting to do is to say to families, you're new, you're going to be assigned to your neighborhood school, but if you want to go somewhere else, let us know and we'll put you on that list. And what we have found is slowly but surely, we're building up neighborhood schools. Like one of my favorite schools is Lyons. You know, it's a great little school that the building needs some work, don't get me wrong. But, you know, what I found is the families that live around Lyons don't really send their kids to Lyons. And because we have this, if you ever come to my office again, I have a heat map, which is like all the little dots of where the kids live and where they go to school. And we have disinvested in our neighborhoods. And that's really sad because when you live in the neighborhood where your school is, and you walk to school, and you walk with your friends and the parents. There's a lot of stuff there. And so, you know, I think that we have a long way to go. We right now have 7, I could be wrong, but I think it's 7 K4s or K3s. Kavanaugh's still a K3. We're not touching, we're done. Like, the way that we're structured right now is the way that we're going to structure, barring an extra 3,000 kids or barring 2,000 kids leaving or something like that. But the decision of taking very, very under-enrolled schools, putting them together to create K-8s so that families could send their kids to one school, so that they could get full art, music, et cetera, so that transportation can be easier, so that we can invest in those programs. And what we saw was that's how families were voting with their feet, is that when they had, so Dwight Rich has, what, 650 kids. That's a K-8. It was a K-8 before I got here. It'll be a K-8, I hope, after I get here. But what did we see was Pattengill and Gardner. I mean, Gardner has 903 kids as of today, I think. It's a K-8. The families seem to like that. We want to make sure that families have choice. That's the real key. You have 7 or so schools that are K3, K4. You have, you know, 8 or 10 that are K8. And then you've got your 4 high schools, because I want everybody to know we did create a new high school this year, which is Lansing Tech, which is awesome, which is a CTE high school, Career and Technical Education High School. Only has 75 kids, but it'll get to 400. So look, there's a lot of reasons. I'm happy to go more into depth, but what we saw again was families wanted the 7th and 8th graders out of the high schools. They wanted places to send their kids and all of their kids at the same time, and they wanted a place that they felt comfortable. And what we saw was that they really liked sending their kids to Wexford. So like we had 2 Montessori programs. We had a K6 Montessori and a K5 Montessori and a 6-8 Montessori. We combined them together into one building. It is now one of our buildings that has 0 seats. They like the K-8, and that's what we're seeing. But if you don't like K-8, which God bless, you can send your kid to a K3 or a K4, and then a 5-8. The 5-8s are, well, the 5-8s are, you've got your Sheridan Road, you've got your Mount Hope, you've got your, come to me, and so, what? North. No, North's a K-8 now. And so you've got choices for all of it. And then if you really want choice, you can do online. We have an online school, which, by the way, has almost 400 students in it, which is actually pretty impressive. So anyway, there's a lot there.
I'm going to ask one last question, but maybe you'll stay around for people who have other questions, because it's almost 8:30, and then that gives you all a choice. We still have food. So in Lansing schools, where I was a parent, and in East Lansing schools, where I'm currently a parent, the parent council consists of maybe 9 or 10 people who meet maybe once a month. Maybe they support a fundraiser, or they are finding out about some random grants. Is there a better model for parent and community involvement, including the league?
There is. So Lansing has this thing called PCAC, which is basically a parent group, and it gets very little attendance, right? And I've seen PTOs or PTAs have maybe 5 or 6 or whatever. Here's the truth. I've been in education for over 20 years, and every parent I have ever met loves their children. Every parent I have ever met wants what's best for their children. And every parent I've ever met wants to be involved in some way, shape, or form. But sadly, we, again, like CTE and like all these other things, we create barriers to entry. And so what we have to start doing is coming to the parents. Is there a place that parents go? Is there a time where parents are more, do we offer daycare? Do we offer transportation? So when I was a principal, we had a building that had a very little parents came. And what did we do? We asked the parents what would help. You know what would help? Daycare or childcare, food, and transportation. So what did we do? We gave everybody a Metro card. We had our seniors and juniors take care of the little babies, and we fed them. And we went from PTA rates of 5, 10% to 20 to 30 to 40. So I think this district, like sadly many others, have to really think about honestly understanding that don't ever say, oh, well, you know, these parents, they just don't come. Well, there's a lot of barriers, right? And so how do we break them down? You'll see, I don't know if any of you read the superintendent's newsletter. If you do, thank you. If you don't, sign up for it. It is free. And one of the things that I'm going to be doing is actually creating a parent council where I'm going to be inviting parents just to come to my office once a month, where we will give them transportation, give them food, give them childcare. And I expect that a lot of parents are going to do it. And it's going to be their voice. I'm just going to listen. I started this last year with high school kids, and it's awesome. So once a month, I have about 12 high school kids come and meet with me and the head of high schools, and they just talk. And boy, do I learn what is going on in high schools. Kids will tell you the truth. So I think, you know, and I'll apologize for this, I don't think we've necessarily focused on the parents as much as I would have liked these first couple of years, because we have to get so many of the systems right. But this year and next year, I think we've got to figure out, how do you activate families to come into the schools, to volunteer, but also that their voice matters, because a lot of times organizations, systems, structures say to parents, we don't value your voice. So I'm really hoping, I had promised the community that by the end of the month, we were going to have a sign up for the Superintendent's Parents Council. My hope is that we're going to sit the first one at the end in November, hopefully before Thanksgiving, and we'll see how many people show up. And if a lot of people show up, great. And if not, that's on me. And again, outputs, not inputs. I don't want a superintendent saying, well, I tried, I invited, nobody showed up. How many people are coming to the party? So. Anyway.
Food helps.
Food does, and so does transportation and childcare. So anyway, well,
so thank you very much.